Okay, we're starting. Hi, everyone, and welcome. We'll wait for a moment as people get settled, and we'll start in a minute. So welcome, everybody who's joining. We'll start in a couple of seconds as people are getting settled. We have a high attendance. Okay, I think we can start now. Okay, great. Hi, everyone, and welcome to today's webinar. Our webinar is called Child-Friendly Cities, Designing Inclusive Urban Spaces for All. It's a pleasure to have you all here. My name is Naila Sanyour, and I will be moderating today's session. This event is co-organized by All Things Urban and EIT Urban Mobility. So to let you know about who we are, All Things Urban is the leading global career platform connecting over 90,000 professionals shaping cities worldwide. We support urbanists like you at all stages of your career with career guidance, skill building courses, a membership program for professionals, curated lists of jobs, educational programs, opportunities. And for organizations, we offer job promotions, webinars, community building support, and access to urban talent worldwide. So if you want to learn more about all things urban, I'm going to share links in the chat. And our partner for today's webinar is EIT Urban Mobility. EIT brings you the learning platform UMX, Urban Mobility Explained. So UMX is a learning platform. They offer dozens of free online courses for professionals who want to upskill or reskill their knowledge in urban mobility, and the courses are free, self-paced, very dynamic, very short. Some of them you can only finish in an hour and a half. And so we're going to show you later one of these courses, which is called Street for Kids, which was authored by Carlota Sainz, who is one of our speakers today. So I won't make spoilers. We'll look at that in a moment. So stay tuned. And meanwhile, I will share with you the links to UMX in the chat so you see what's up over there. And as you get settled, I'll let you know a bit the house rules. So this webinar, as you might have seen, will be recorded. And we will send this recording in a follow-up email. So for everyone who registered for the event, you will receive an email. And as a reminder for how things work on Zoom, you have the option as we go through the webinar to write in the chat section to let us know about your ideas, opinions. But mainly if you want to ask questions during the webinar, during the presentations, and after in the Q&A part, you have the dedicated Q&A section. So you can have your questions there so we can find it and answer it. And right now, we see that some people have already posted in the chat, so you can tell us where you're coming from. So hi from Madrid, where I'm based, and let us know, what are you looking forward to learning today? So when you use the chat, make sure you select the option chat with everyone in case it's not set by default. And now we can get started after the house rules. So the webinar is called Child-Friendly Cities, Designing Inclusive Urban Spaces for All. And today we're going to look at inclusive cities because yes, the title is about kids, about child-friendly cities. But the real question is also that we're going to be dealing with is how does designing spaces with children in mind can actually create better cities that work for all of us. So that's what inclusivity is about. And in this webinar, we would like to shed light on how urban planning can actually foster health, safety, joy for everyone in the city. So we're going to talk about why it matters to design urban spaces with children in mind as a door for inclusive spaces for all. We'll look at case studies of urban interventions. We're going to have a deep dive into a hospital case, and we're going to look at strategies and techniques that we can apply in various urban contexts to enhance what we call universal design. So design that is accessible to people regardless of age, disability, or other factors. So if you're an urban planner, an architect, a policymaker, a public health professional, we hope the session gives you inspiration, relevant information to consider in your work. If you're here out of curiosity, we hope this offers you a new perspective on designing urban spaces. And without further ado, I would like to present our expert speakers today. So we have Carlota Sainz de Tejada and we have Magali Thompson. I'm going to introduce both of you with a little bio. So starting with Carlota Sainz de Tejada is a postdoctoral researcher at the Barcelona Institute for Global Health, so IS Global, in the Urban Planning, Environment, and Health Initiative. So Carlota, you have a background in architecture and urban planning, and you participated in very different projects on health and housing, health and urban planning, informal settlements, in collaboration with renowned international institutions. And Carlota will give us an overview of what it means to design inclusive, healthy cities for all ages, and give us some inspiring principles and examples. And I'm going to share, Carlota, your LinkedIn so people can find you later. So I just shared in the chat. And on Magali Thompson, your project lead for placemaking at the Great Ormond Street Hospital. So the short for GOSH. So we're going to talk about GOSH. Magali is an architect and she's currently leading the transformation of a polluted, traffic-dominated urban street that's next to a new children cancer center into a climate-resilient, healthy, and child-friendly street. Magali, you previously worked for 14 years at an architecture firm, and you were a director, and you specialized in education projects. So Magali will lead us through a deep dive in the case of the Great Ormond Street Hospital and how the public space was transformed to become healthier and safer in the surrounding of the hospital. So the link to Magali's LinkedIn will be posted in the chat. Here goes. And so you can find her later. So you both will be possibly flooded by requests after your presentations. And before giving the floor to you, just to let you know how the session will run. So first we'll have the presentations by Carlota and Magali. Carlota will start, Magali will follow. And while the speakers are presenting, we invite all of you to post your questions in the Q&A section, preferably not the chat so we can collect them later. And how the Q&A section work is that you can post, but you can also vote for the questions you would like to see answered. So by clicking the thumbs up. And after the presentations, we'll go directly in the Q&A. So we're going to start about some questions about Magali and Carlota's career and advice for you if you're interested in working in a similar field. And then we'll pick questions from the Q&A. And during the webinar, we have a few polls that will pop up just to check on some opinions that you might have and or just impressions. And to kickstart with this first poll question, we're going to ask you, first of all, you might have seen this little window pop up in front of you if you're on a computer. What percentage of your health do you think is affected by where and how you live? So 10 to 20%, 50%, or 80%. And Carlota will kickstart her presentation by giving you an answer to this. So without further ado, I'd like to give you the floor, Carlota.
Thank you, Naila. I'm going to share my screen. Okay, hope you can see it correctly. Anyway, so thank you, Urban Mobility. Yeah, thank you everyone, All Things Urban and EIT for putting together this webinar. I'm thrilled to be here and looking forward to the discussion later on. So I'm just gonna get started with what is, let's say, a basic and maybe not news, a statement that's maybe not news for most of you, but it's an essential, really key point or starting point for this presentation, which is how that urban design really determines our exposures and behaviors. Exposures and behaviors that are very relevant to health. So depending on how walkable or cyclable our neighborhood is, how accessible green space is, how reliable and safe is public transportation, we will decide to move in a certain way and go out more or less. It will affect our exposure to air pollution, to noise, to heat, but it will also affect our stress levels, our amount of social contacts we might have every day. And we know that these are all important for the development of certain diseases and symptoms that are not just physical, but also mental, and could eventually result in a loss of healthy years of life. So for those who have been answering the poll, I think from what I saw before, most of you were right. Up to 80%, shockingly, of our health is shaped or determined by where and how we live. That's why we often hear this say of how the zip code is actually a better predictor of our health and life expectancy than our genetic code. So what happens when we design a city with lots of infrastructure and lots of space for cars? Well, not surprisingly, we get lots of cars because driving becomes the most convenient mode with all that comes with it. But what do car-dominated cities mean in terms of child health? This is what I would like to focus on now, and we'll take a look at some of the main impacts. And we'll do that by inviting you all to join on a walk, Laya, her mom, and her little brother. They're walking from home to the park, and we'll see that they're really looking forward to it, but that they will encounter several issues. The first of these issues is, of course, air pollution. And just a quick note here, when I usually speak to people about what they might envision as a better streets for kids, they tend to first of all, think of safety in terms of reducing, the likelihood of cars being hitting kids or kids running into the cars and things like that, and maybe a little playground somewhere. But we need to keep in mind that air pollution actually kills a lot more people than road accidents do. In some countries, it's up to 10 times more, and kids are especially vulnerable to air pollution. But we should also consider noise because it's an environmental stressor that, and specifically traffic noise, that we tend to underestimate. We think it's just annoying, but it's actually increasing our risk of heart disease, of mental health problems, and it's even impairing children's cognitive development when it's nearby their school. So we're walking with Laya, and it's not especially comfortable. It's a Mediterranean city that's really subject to increasing heat events and heat waves. And there's no trees or very scarcely green space along the way, no shade. It's really hot and uncomfortable, but they continue. And at some point, something catches Laya's attention, and so she runs away from her mom and heads towards the road. And of course, this is a scare. Laya gets reprimanded for running, and I'm sure this has happened to many of you sometime, or you've seen it. And the thing is, in cities with high levels of motorized traffic, of course, unsafe conditions have led to parental overprotection, which is at the same time impeding that kids learn and develop some essential skills for their life. So there's a lack of independence, which is also putting kids at risk of experiencing other type of problems like mental, emotional stress, loneliness, or isolation. So I ask you, do you think that after this incident, Laya's mother feels confident in letting or having Laya walk to school on her own every day? Well, probably not. And this is something that we're seeing a lot worldwide. So the perception of risk means that more caregivers drive their kids to school, which means that school environments are filling up with cars. This makes it, at the same time, it makes it more unsafe, more unhealthy. And so it's a vicious cycle that's really hard to break. But anyway, Laya and her mom and her brother finally make it to the playground. They see their friends, they tell them all about what they're experienced, but they only stay for not for long because it's peak traffic hour. The noise, the fumes are really uncomfortable, so they decide to go back home shortly after they arrived. This is relevant because lately, and especially after COVID-19 pandemic, studies have found dramatic declines in child physical activity outdoors, and at the same time, dramatic increases in recreational screen time. And these are two very important factors that contribute to overweight and obesity. So I know that this might all seem very depressing, and I'm very sorry, but bear with me because not all is lost. In fact, there's a lot that we can do to make it better. And of course, we need structural changes, but we can start from we can start small. We can start from the very local, from the design of streets, public spaces that will not just keep our kids safe, but also really help them to thrive every step of the way. There's no one size fits all, of course, so there's no simple formula for every context, but I brought today 4 key messages that might help in the discussion. The first message is to consider all phases of childhood, which is actually a way to consider everyone. For instance, at the beginning of our childhood, the role of caregivers is essential. So we're talking about having accessible infrastructure to push a stroller, which we know is also beneficial for other population groups that might have some kind of difficulty moving around. Is considering the ways we can cycle comfortably with children and not just walk. Also having public restrooms or changing stations, which should not only be on the women's side, for instance. And this will allow them, caregivers and their kids, to actually spend more time outside and not have to be running back home or just, spending time very nearby their home. Also, adequate spaces to pause and breastfeed are very important, to eat some snacks along the way, spaces that should be comfortable and quiet or shaded when it's hot. And we should also, lastly, consider that often caregivers are older people, like grandparents, right? And so they would really benefit from all these design features that we mentioned before in their use of the public space, whether they are with children or on their own or with other friends. I found it interesting as well, just when talking about the different phases of childhood, how around the age of 8 years, children get better at calculating the distance and speed. So they are more prone to engage in, let's say, safer crossing um, activity. And so this will really is an opportunity to expand their independent mobility and build these life skills we were mentioning through maybe walking and cycling or cycling to school, using public transport by themselves, but they of course need safe and adequate infrastructure to do so. And I also wanted to really highlight the importance of addressing and considering teenagers, because this is a group that is often viewed as a nuisance and excluded from many, of course, from playgrounds or schoolyards and other public spaces. But social interaction with peers at that stage is really important for their development and their health. And so we should also provide spaces, and streets should also provide these spaces for them to engage in this social interaction. So, of course, considering everyone is really considering different needs, but also identifying those that might be common to all phases. And this is why I brought 5 that we seem to have identified as most common to all phases. And these are space, visibility, spaces to pause and stay, safe and reliable mobility, choices, and spaces for play and social interaction. And I wanted to just briefly show you one example of an intervention that I think is very nice and touches on many of the issues I just mentioned. It's from an urban sustainability consultants in a city in Pamplona in the north of Spain that it all started with really everyday experience by these urbanists and they while walking through their city every day with their kids, they identified a problem in the crossings that had, let's say, cars parked nearby. And it's that it took at least about 10 steps for a child to actually see and be able to see if it's safe to cross. So for the kid to see the car, but also for the driver in the car to see the child. And this happens in many spaces. They actually were able to pinpoint where it happened throughout the city, and it's pretty much everywhere. And what they did is, since they were very invested in this, they pushed for a municipal bylaw to secure a distance of at least 5 meters from any pedestrian crossing to be free from parked cars, and more, therefore, increasing visibility in the 2 directions, right? And they made their case, really, and this measure was approved by the city and implemented. And as you see, there is this space that isn't very big, but really it can be replicated in it, and it in global it can be a real gain for pedestrians, right? And so what should we do, or what could they do with this gained space? They thought of and proposed some sustainable drainage systems, which some of them have been, as you see here, they have been already implemented. Then they also thought of maybe some of these spaces that are nearby the local school could become meeting points and maybe more playful or stimulated, and involve the scholars and the staff and children in the design of them. And they also thought of how to make it compatible with the cycling infrastructure. As you see here, lanes get narrow as they arrive to the crossing, and they even reached out to an association of people with visual impairment to see how this new design of the crossing could adapt to their needs as well. And so it's a very nice example, and I encourage you to look it out. The second, let's say, key message would be to activate the place. And in this sense, it's not just about freeing up space, but also programming. And this works very well, especially when temporary solutions are demonstrating the potential of newly transformed spaces, right? To really boost pedestrian activity. And an interesting example, is the living streets in Ghent. These are, let's say, facilitated by the city in the sense that they provide the permits, but it's really led by the local community. And so the organization, the activities, the maintenance, everything is responsibility of the residents. You might have also been familiar with the staff playgrounds in Copenhagen, but a lot can be done. Garden activities, bike rides. The third message or key message would be to build, support, and engage. This, of course, is very important throughout the entire process, from the very design and conceptualization to then the implementation and maintenance along it, to make it really, to reduce barriers and hopefully make the intervention long lasting. In this sense, it's interesting to find that asphalt art and storytelling and storytelling murals are great and often inexpensive ways to get different groups involved in the community, and maybe in the design or in the implementation. And in fact, a study in the States found dramatic decreases in crashing rates in asphalt art sites. So this brings me to my last and final point, which is that we really need to measure what happens, compare before and after transformations, to really understand what worked where and what didn't and why. So in that sense, whether we were measuring car pedestrian crash rate, as in the previous example, or maybe the levels of noise or air pollution, or the increase in pedestrian traffic, maybe we can ask the community's level of satisfaction with the space. But we really need to understand this information on what works and what not, to scale up or replicate in the most effective way possible. And just to end, these are a bit some resources that might be you might be interested in checking out. And that would be all from my side. Thank you so much for your attention, and looking forward to questions.
Thank you so much, Carlota. There's already some engagement asking about the key principles and a lot of questions already that are popping up. For those who asked if you would receive the recording, yes, you will. So all the information that Carlota and Magali are sharing, you will receive, whether you registered or attended, you will get it. Carlota, you did mention that 80% of our health is affected by where and how we live, and this is quite shocking. It's more than our DNA, more than anything else. Like 80% is predominantly the reason why we could be healthier or less healthy. I really enjoyed the comics drawings, and people are already commented on that. And Ashley mentioned that in the chat that we need to talk about children's independence. So how children can actually be autonomous people. And they're little people, but they are people. And most children are completely capable of moving in their neighborhood, going to school, buying bread and visiting their friends, but it's their environment that actually doesn't allow them to do so. And you highlighted in your principles in the second part of the presentation how seemingly small details like improving the visibility of a crossing or having a mural can actually make a big difference. So nothing is too small or insignificant to make people comfortable and safe in a space. So thank you so much for that. We also have some mentions in the chat about the course of UMX, and we'll have a little moment to show you what course this is actually about. And Carlota was the author of this course with the UMX, so we'll talk about that later. We have some questions already in the chat, so thank you, and you can vote for those you like best or you would like to see answered. And without further ado, after Carlota's presentation, we're going to give the floor to Magali, our second guest speaker. So Magali, the floor is yours.
Great, thank you very much. I'll just share my screen. Let me know if you can see that or give me a thumbs up. Great, thank you. So following on from Carlota, that was a really great presentation. Thank you, Carlota. I'm going to tell you a little bit now about the work I've been doing at Great Ormond Street Hospital. Great Ormond Street, I'll refer to GOSH now because it's easier. It's a very big children's hospital in the centre of London. And I'm just going to start off here with some collages. These are a series, we did an exercise with children at the hospital as well as local children who live in the community to ask them to envision how they imagined the area in 2030, what was their sort of dream neighbourhood, if you like. And we were flooded with these responses, which are full of nature and animals, which I think you'll probably agree are very beautiful. In terms of what we've been doing at GOSH, this is a plan here, and it shows how the hospital is made up of a series of buildings which have grown over time, incrementally, like many hospitals, I think. And it also shows, if you look at the brown rectangle here at the bottom, we're in the process of starting construction now for a brand new cancer centre for children there. And because we'll have a new building on the street here, we thought it was also important to address the street itself. So this pink dashed line shows the area that I've been focusing on in terms of creating a healthy hospital street. And it's involved looking beyond the boundaries of the hospital. So this is a very typical scene outside the hospital. I think you'll agree it's far from ideal. It's a very hostile environment, quite dangerous. The air quality is appalling. It's noisy. These situations that are shown here, for example, create a lot of anger. So there's often shouting and arguing. And this is over 750 children come into GOSH every day. So this is obviously something that we were keen to improve. We have an air quality monitor outside the hospital. Our one is shown here in the red dashed lines. But all these London hospitals, in fact, have air quality monitors outside them. And none of them are meeting the World Health Organization limits, which is shocking. And I think, especially if you think about the fact that you know, we're treating children in the hospital with respiratory illnesses. In some cases, there's no point them coming out onto streets like this afterwards. This diagram just shows you how children in particular are very vulnerable. Children take more breaths per minute than adults, shown in the black circle in the center, 30 to 60 breaths per minute. And the particles go further. The smaller the particles, the further they penetrate your bodies. And up to the ages of 3 or 4 in particular, children's organs are very vulnerable as they're developing and growing. And in terms more generally, I think in terms of our streets, climate resilience is obviously of huge importance. We're seeing an increase in extreme weather events all around the world. Even in the UK, we've been getting to 40 degrees in the summer, which is pretty unusual. And I think that the images on the right just show very clearly that both those photos are of the same city on the same day, and they just show what a difference having planting and trees and canopy make in terms of cooling the temperature. So essentially, I think part of the issue that we have now in cities is that since the advent of the car, sort of in the early 1900s, the hierarchy has started. It sort of, if you look at the triangle, we start first with the car being planned around first, and then maybe bicycles, then people, and lastly children. So we're advocating reversing that hierarchy and actually starting with children first. So we did a lot of work, a lot of engagement with children in the hospital, but also children in the local neighbourhood, because we have an impact on the neighbourhood, and we're very keen that we have a positive impact on our local neighbourhood, and carried out exercises with children, asking them about their own neighbourhoods and what their ideas were, how they'd like to see the area improved, and we created this kind of brief for the project. We had a few short-term interventions, for example, a bit more like pilot schemes, if you like. This photo shows a parklet here, which is this sort of bench with planting around it. The important thing about it is that it takes a space of a parked car. So symbolically, it shows you what you can have instead of a parked car. Also, I noticed there was a question about car ramming, actually. In terms of this parklet, it's designed to a size and weight, which is actually also functioning to stop cars ramming into it. But I think these kind of projects, and also here's an image of a play street where we actually close the street once a year. And just take over, in fact, and lots of children in the hospital come out onto the street. Some of them may not have left their beds in months. The important point about that, I think, is that although we do have local parks around us, they are too far for a lot of the children, and I guess it's the principle of doorstep play and the importance of having something you can do really on your doorstep. And the other thing that the Play Street does is it helps people envision a completely different street. It's hard to visualize a different street when all you ever see in it are cars, and events like this give you a taste of what the future could be. So in terms of our long-term vision, which we're working towards now, we've created a design where I'm not sure if you can see my cursor, but the new Cancer Centre for Children will be at the top here, and the idea is that we have create the street becomes one way instead of two-way. By doing that, you suddenly have twice the amount of pavement, if you like, or public realm here to the north. Cars that need to are allowed to come through. Obviously at the hospitals there are a lot of logistics, and some people will need to be dropped off. And the cars which are not related to the hospital are sent down here. And essentially it means you can go from an environment which is like this, as it is currently, to something more like this, which is, I think you'll agree, sort of transformational in terms of creating a variety of spaces and uses and seating opportunities, providing climate resilience in the form of tree canopy and sustainable urban drainage, biodiversity, and a rich sensory biophilic experience. This is not just for children, of course, it's for the local community, adults, and hospital staff who often need a space for respite. And Carlotta touched on the importance of measuring before and after, which we're also doing here, where we created this scheme benefits wheel, if you like, to illustrate where the street is now and how improved the proposed scheme will be in terms of inclusive in terms of all the themes around the wheel. Thank you. That's it from me. I'll stop sharing.
Thank you so much, Magali. That was a quick view of something that is possible, and there's so many possibilities, and you showed us a long-term vision, and you gave us a bit of a taste of what things can be like. And this is only one example that we saw with Carlota. There are so many other examples, and I really love the collages in the beginning when you show how kids can actually imagine so much about their environment, and making them part of the process can actually be really enlightening and playful, and even adults can just enjoy such processes as well. We do have some questions in the chat about including different stakeholders, so we'll keep that in for the question part. So we would actually like to launch a second poll, because now we finished both presentations of Carlota and Magali. And we know that, as we saw in the chat, you come from different parts in the world. And so the question is, do you think it's feasible to implement suggested approaches in your context? We already have some questions in the chat, in the Q&A, of people who are wondering about certain guidelines, about certain ways to approach stakeholder engagement in their own context. So the question is, do you think it's feasible? Definitely, we have the resources and support, possibly with some adjustment and planning, or just not feasible because of a lack of resources and support. We see that clearly there's a focus on, possibly because context can be difficult. There might not be a support from the public sector. There can be a difficulty in engaging, sometimes the citizens, sometimes other actors in the process. So we have until now, well, we have 100% of answers. More than 60% think it is possible. So we have an overwhelming let's say, optimism in the room. Happy to see that there's not a lot of people who think it is not feasible. I think also we might have a bias of people who are actually working in the field and who know that this is possible with the right work and the right approach and mindset. And just for those of you who don't believe it's possible, we would like to show you that it is and that there is tools for that. We would like to show you now a little glimpse of a UMX course that EIT Urban Mobility is actually offering, and that was authored by Carlota. So let me just guide you through this course. It's called Street for Kids course, and I will share my screen just for a second because some people in the chat already mentioned that they took the course and that they recommend it. So I will let you know about it. So let me share my screen for a sec. So I will show you how you can have more insights on designing Street for Kids. So this is the course that was authored by Carlota. Street for Kids, Urban Spaces for Children to Grow. It's free, and we'll let you know after how to get a certificate for a small fee, and we have also a discount. But basically, it was Carlota who authored this course, and it's very short. You see, it's 2.5 hours, and you can really take it in your schedule in a couple of days, and you'll have a lot of insights. It was very well rated, and it includes a lot of varied materials, real case studies, references on the topic, and it's based on scientific evidence and knowledge about health. So we already have a few ratings, and I think some people in the room took the course and were recommending it. And so also, for those of you who are registered to this course and who have, to this webinar and who have attended now, there's an exclusive promo code, as Anastasia is adding in the chat. So if you want to get the official certificate, you can actually get the course for free, and then you can get the official certificate, which has a small fee. But if you're still doubting, you can get a 20% exclusive discount course by adding the promo code Street for Kids. And as you see in the chat, it's only applicable until 16 Feb. So feel free to go ahead and discover the materials that are there. And now we can go through the Q&A with our speakers. We already have a lot of questions in the chat, but just to kickstart with something a bit more, let's say, personal, and to get to know you more and your approaches and how you got where you are, I have a couple of questions for both of you, Carlota and Magali, and then we'll pick up the questions from the chat. So first of all, I would like to ask you how you got there. So what inspired you to work in the field that you're working in? How did you come to be involved in the topic of healthy, accessible, inclusive urban spaces? And maybe we can start with Carlota.
Sure. Thanks. Well, I work, as you mentioned before, in the Urban Planning, Environment, and Health Initiative. So it's around urban health, but I really wasn't that into health when I was studying my undergraduate studies, and maybe because I wasn't aware of it, but I was always interested in, like the criteria for the design and what is behind like the social perception and the use of spaces. So how sometimes there's a disconnect between the physical environment and how people perceive it and appreciate it and use it. And so I was a lot into the how to measure that, and I don't know, especially in my during my thesis project, my PhD, I was working on discovering like new tools to sort of delve into that, and I came across IS Global, who does they do lots of work that is very relevant to urban planning, but apparently there were basically no urban planners there. And so I sort of reached out, and at the time, of course, now we have more. But I reached out, and there was an opportunity to collaborate with them, first on more on housing and residential environment, but from there on, it's been years now, and I've been very lucky to get involved in many different projects. So yeah, I mean, I would say really reaching out to groups and people that maybe are not from your field, but it worked for me, and yeah, and I actually think that more health should be I don't know, part of the content during our undergrad in architecture and urban planning, because it's actually a lot about that, even if we don't put the name, right, and we don't explicitly mention it.
Thanks, Carlota. Magali?
Yeah, no, I agree, Carlotta. I think health should take a much more larger part of architectural training. I trained as an architect and focused for a long time on designing schools. So I think I've always been interested in children and how they learn and how they use space. About 10 years ago or so, I started to get more interested in cities, and maybe rather than buildings, more the spaces in between buildings and how children use those spaces and how they use cities, not just children, but essentially different, how cities are very much designed just for commuters, for example, going into the center of a city, and how do women use cities, how do children use them, how do older populations use them, and I'm fascinated about the impact of that the cities and what we eat and how we travel and what we do has on our health. So I guess that sort of explains the direction that my career has gone in so far.
Thanks, Magali. And at All Things Urban, we do have a lot of engagement with people who come from an architecture or urban design background, and people who want to include very different perspective. And we see it's very interesting that something that is assumed to be like building buildings, but then there's so many perspectives like global health that can be included in such yeah, let's say disciplines that can actually be super interesting when they're very multidisciplinary and when you bring a lot of expertises on board. So my second question is a bit more trying to give advice maybe. So based on your experience, what advice would you give to people who would like to work in the way you do? So includes the lens of health and accessibility and urban planning and design and architecture. So do you have any specific entry point or recommendations that you would like to give to people? Maybe Magali, you can start.
I suppose I think working in municipalities or health institutions or more scientific organizations or areas like that might be pathways into looking at things from these kind of angles. I think more and more cities around the world are realizing that children, 25% of the global population roughly is under 18. So it's a huge proportion of people that we need to be thinking about. So I think that's one way. And another way, I think, is just trying to see how children experience space. I did an exercise with my son strapping a camera 95 centimeters above the ground onto him, which is the average height of a 3-year-old, and just sort of watch the recording of how he saw the world from that height. And I think when you start to sort of put yourself in their shoes in that way, it's fascinating to kind of understand, and also the frustration as well of my children and how long it can take them to go from one end of the road to the other because of everything they climb and everything they want to do. It's just, yeah, part of it is watching and observing and learning that way, I think.
Thank you, Magali. Nice experiment. And Carlota?
Sure, I agree as well. A lot of observing and also asking people and maybe different groups. And I mean, we're now focused on kids, but for example, in recent studies have also been working with older people who and the way they experience their public space and how they value certain aspects or features is really relevant and important. And I would also maybe, I mean, I would be happy to share, like, there are lots of resources out there, like open access tools and checklists and indicators. Some we did from IS Global, but there are many others. And that, I mean, if for people that are involved in a certain projects or planning to do so, I mean, there's a lot out there that could help into sort of include a health perspective and really, or maybe even get close to evaluate in a certain way, like from using health and well-being indicators to evaluate the project. I mean, there's a lot out there, and we're working on that. And these are resources that are mostly free and open, and that's a way that, I don't know, for someone who's really willing to initiate, it could be nice. I mean, and yeah, that would be my ideas around this question.
Thanks, Carlota. That's great, and that gives a bit of an idea of, well, where you come from and how people can do similar things as you. And now we have a lot of questions already in the chat, and we even have some questions that we received upon registration from people before even entering the webinar. So as I will be asking you questions, I'll try to bundle a couple of questions together. So some might be parts from the questions that we received before the webinar, and some from the ones that we are receiving right now as we go in the chat and in the Q&A. Try to put your Q&A, your questions, I mean, in the Q&A section, because this way you can actually see the ones that were upvoted, see the ones that were answered. So we'll tick the ones that were answered as we go, and they will go into the answered part. And I'm going to start with one question about mainly stakeholder engagement. So by the way, for those of you who I see sometimes people raising their hand in the webinar, and we're going to pick the questions and I will be asking them to the speakers. So I'll be bundling a bit together different things also to make the best out of our time, because we have like, well, let's say 10 minutes for the Q&A. And so the first question is about stakeholder engagement. So we have different ideas. So one of the questions is, these changes that you are proposing are actually structural changes that require a lot of engagement from different stakeholders. So you have to have probably the local government on board, but you also have to have the hospital on board, the resident on board. So how do you do to involve the different stakeholders? We have this question from India saying, like, how can we involve different community? We have a question from the previously registered questions in the chat in the webinar, which is how can we involve the children and caregiver in the process that Magali you touched upon, and what about the residents of the hospital surrounding area? So I think Magali, these questions are all a bit oriented to you and then the GOSH project. So how do you deal with so many different aspects and people involved?
Yeah, no, great question. I think the big challenge has been that we don't own the street. It's not even our street. The street belongs to everyone. So we've been working very closely in partnership with Camden Council, who are the local municipality that the GOSH finds itself in. And it was really important from the outset to work in partnership with them and to ensure that everything we were proposing aligned with the local policy, local planning policy. So there were no sort of contradictions in that way. And we've also been working closely with the local community. That has been challenging, mainly because, not so much because of the Healthy Hospital street proposal. I mean, no one particularly likes the street as it is now when you think about what the photos look like. But it's more because we're going to be building the cancer centre for children first. So it means there'll be construction in the area for about 4 years, and that's I mean, that's tough, I think, for in any situation for residents and neighbours to accept, I guess. But in terms of the street proposals themselves, people have been positive, because I think everyone finds it an unpleasant environment. It's not good for anyone, I don't think. And I touched a little bit on engaging with children, but clearly, as it's a hospital, we've had to do things like engage with children individually at their bedside, or things like that, because not all the children are able to. For example, we've used Google Maps to zoom in with them to their local neighbourhoods, and they've been able to show us that way about things about their area that they like, and we've used tools or methods like that.
Thank you, Magali. And Carlota, feel free if you want to answer as well in your work.
Well, I mean, I think Magali has especially experience in that. I was just thinking, and this is also included, I must say, in the course. Like there's a tool also to sort of in a fun way to work on like a street cross section, and so and I always thought that this would be very fun to also work with younger people, and so they become the designers and they sort of understand and physically understand the spatial hierarchy that you might be applying and what kind of features they would like to add. And so this is just one tool, but it's very, let's say, interactive and very nice. I can share it later on the chat as well.
Yeah, Carlota, thanks so much. And that's it links to one of the questions that we received, which is someone was saying that they were surprised about the pure absence of guidelines when preparing integrated master plans of cities. And the question was, how can we work in this direction? Are there guidelines? And of course, we'll share, Carlota, you will share resources that we will share with the audience after the course. But would you like to speak on certain guidelines that are known or that you would like to recommend?
I was just going
Well,
to say, there's a big absence of certainly planning of building guidelines and policies in relation to children in the UK. For example, in London's made up of 32 boroughs, and I think 2 of them have specific policies which are focused towards children. But I do think there's a growing awareness of that, and we may be able to also post a link to the LSE course that there is for municipalities around the world. There's a sort of child-friendly course which is free, in fact. But yeah, I think I mean, there are lots of organizations like ARUP and also like Carlotta's mentioned as well, who have really good child-friendly guidance, but it's not necessarily mandatory, unfortunately.
Yeah, we're receiving in the chat some recommendations of different resources that people are recommending. And hopefully these things become a bit more mainstream in what the question was about, more integrated master plans, so that these guidelines don't remain as separated resources, but actually become part of the mainstream. A couple of other questions are related to the challenges. So what we know that there's a lot of challenges that can come, well, like a pushback from residents or a pushback from cars. So there was one question about when you do these little interventions, how can you make them safe for car ramming attacks? Or how do you face a municipal pushback when you want to put the focus on children, but the actual focus of residents is to want to have more cars in the area and to reach their homes? So can you either Magali or Carlota, can you talk about the challenges that you might face when you're dealing with such approaches?
Well, I can say maybe mostly from what I've read about and I looked, I mean, I haven't had like the first person experience, but my feeling is that, yeah, I mean, the more support you get from the different agents and local agents from the very beginning, the better. But yeah, I mean, there are some challenges and it makes maybe, initial projects end up being a lot smaller than they were supposed to or envisioned, or maybe they are implemented, but then they sort of are left because of the lack of maintenance or and so what to do. Yeah, it's not an easy question, but I don't know if my guy has any tips. But yeah, I mean, trying to bring everyone together from the beginning and involving them in the process and then in implementation and thinking about like all the phases, also maintenance, and not like assuming that it's going to stay that way forever. And so yeah, and making the case, I guess, for this, like short term, as Magali was also illustrating with their project, like short-term interventions that really showcase what can happen. I mean, it's not about convincing everybody, because actually, I mean, we have a mandate, and the city has a mandate to make cities and streets better for children and for everybody. And so that's something that should not be under discussion. But you also want to build support, and you want it to be successful. And so yeah, it may be short-term interventions, and as I said, maybe introducing some programming and making it, I mean, suddenly illustrating or demonstrating what it could be, even if it's temporary, is a good way to then, I don't know, get people engaged and a little more motivated to work towards more permanent, solutions or transformations.
Yeah, I agree with Carlotta. I think often you also need some very strong leadership. I think in some cities around the world, mayors have just gone ahead and made quite radical changes to the city, which were perhaps met with a lot of resistance to begin with. But I think sometimes it takes a bit of time for people to get used to change. I think it's difficult to sort of imagine. And I think sometimes after 6 months or a year or whatever, people realize, no, this is actually okay. I prefer this, or it works, or that, the fear is no longer there. So sometimes you have to sort of take that kind of approach as well. But there's often resistance, especially from car users, I think. Yeah.
Yeah, thank you so much. And we also have questions that can be a bit tricky, in the sense that someone who works in child-friendly cities said that they receive critiques about how can you focus on child-friendly cities when cities aren't even friendly for adults. And we saw in your presentation, Carlota, and also Magali, that child-friendly cities are friendly cities for all in a certain way. So it's actually about universal design. But yeah, the question is, unfortunately, sometimes the needs of people who are not the mainstream, like children, who are not necessarily the typical big person, male or whatever, able-bodied, etc. How do we do when these needs are overlooked in favor of other priorities? Can be budget, can be anything. What do you think can be some first steps to address this when the mentality even is not there yet?
I think I think you're right in that when we say child-friendly cities, we could also say sort of age-friendly cities, or I think it's just we're talking about inclusive cities, really, and I think if you design from the point of view of one of the more underrepresented groups, you'll end up with a solution which actually works for everyone in general. I think because we're talking about things like providing benches and shading and access to fresh water and access to toilets, and they're all fairly human issues which everyone needs. And I think I think there is a growing realization that we need to be designing more in that way, personally.
I don't know if Carlota, you would like to add something, but I think there was a clear consensus.
Yes, I agree. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. And of course, I mean, from our standpoint, like from a research institute, of course, we also feel like, the more studies and the more evidence we build up on actually like the impacts or the potential benefits of certain transformations. I mean, our aim is to really convince decision makers and policymakers and communities in general, and raise awareness and things like that. And so yeah, we're on it, and we know there's resistance, and and things like that. But yeah, I mean, there's a lot of people that are also very hopeful and very invested in this, and so yeah.
It's true. I think there's more and more science and research illustrating, well, how badly our health can be affected by these things, but also to mirror that, there's also a lot of research and evidence to illustrate how positive the effects of greenery and access to outdoor space and everything else are on our health as well. So I think that those are both growing in terms of a big evidence base and people's awareness, which is really good.
Excellent. Yeah, thank you so much to both of you for answering thoroughly the questions, and of course we couldn't take every single one of the questions, but we tried to address like a lot of different interests that everyone had, whether in the chat, the Q&A. We had again the question of whether this webinar and the resources will be shared. Yes, we will share with all of you a link, an email with all the resources, the video recording, and you will receive everything. So our session is now coming to an end. Thank you for the crew in the chat. Everyone has been so active today. It's been really interesting to see everyone sharing all the resources, and you will see in the screen that we're sharing, again, a reminder for the courses of UMX in general and the specific course of Street for Kids. We remind you that you can have a 20% discount on this one specifically for attending this webinar. So we would very much encourage you to check it out. It's really a small fee and a lot of knowledge up there. It's packed, and we do encourage you to just take these 2 hours and check all the resources that are available. There are resources, and we do encourage you also to connect with each other. Those of you who are in the chat and shared, well, their names, their LinkedIns, etc. You can connect with the speakers, with us, All Things Urban, with UMX, with EIT Urban Mobility. And as you get out of the webinar, you will be faced with a feedback poll. So we'd be super happy to have your feedback on this webinar. I will also post it in the chat. So you can let us know how things went and how to respond better to your interest and to whatever you would like to know in upcoming webinars as well. So our session is now ending. Thank you again, everyone. We hope you enjoyed it. Thanks for the engagement. You can follow us on social media and or by email. And so we'll stay in touch, definitely. So thank you, everyone, and have a great evening, or wherever you are in the world. Have a great morning, have a great day, and we'll see you around.
Thank you.
Thank you.